Welcome to the VIFF Podcast, recorded on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. This podcast is a chance to hear more from the filmmakers presenting work at the annual Vancouver International Film Festival, as well as year-round at the VIFF Centre. We hope you enjoy the show.
Hello, I'm Alan Franey, the programmer of the Portraits series at the Vancouver International Film Festival. Portraits are documentaries about the arts, music, painting, dance, etc. And we're here today to talk with Jenn Strom, who has directed a wonderful film on E.J. Hughes. It's called The Painted Life of E.J. Hughes, and it's your first film as a director, feature film as a director, correct, Jenn?
That's right, yeah. First feature. I've mostly worked on shorts, often about artists. Yeah.
And we know you at the festival as an editor. You had a film here. You were a guest when we showed a film called Stuffed in 2019, which was a remarkable film about taxidermy, but really the artistry of taxidermy, interviewing people from all over the world who are just such great characters and who have a really high artistry about their approach to that.
Yeah, I always say it's about fine art taxidermy. And the producer, when he first, that was a cold call that I got. That was directed by Aaron Durham, who's based in North Carolina. And they had brought on some Canadian producers and they needed someone to take over the edit. And he pitched it to me as the chef's table of taxidermy. And I totally instantly saw what he meant, that it was going to be creative portraits shot in a very stylish way, very kind of glossy and yeah, it was a fascinating journey to learn.
It was a fabulous film. So we're going to talk now about The Painted Life of E.J. Hughes. I want to set it up a bit before asking you the first question. So simply by reading our first line of description in the film note. Since his death in 2007, the renown of Canadian painter E.J. Hughes has only continued to grow. For decades, his extraordinary works highlighting the landscapes of British Columbia have captivated the public, but his personal life is less known. Now, this is a film that really reveals to even, I think, anyone very familiar with some of his paintings, this whole other dimension of his work. And the personal life is so fascinating. So I just found it one of the most surprising, engaging films that I've seen in the last year. I really loved it. So how did you come into this project? I know it's associated with the Knowledge Network, but was it a project brought to them by you, or that's the way it happened? Can you tell us a bit about it?
Sure. This project was originally, or the first iteration of an E.J. Hughes film was a 2-minute short, and it was part of a series about BC artists that I was working on called Iconic. And that it was 7 short films. Knowledge does these series sometimes that will all play as one or can be broken into interstitials. And that project got put into development, and then it didn't end up going because some funding stuff happened. And in the end, it didn't. The only film that was made was the Bill Reed short. That was the first film that we were making. That was co-directed with Patrick Shannon, who had the wonderful documentary Saints and Warriors out this spring. And so the E.J. Hughes film was part of that, and it was just meant to be a little road trip. The whole film was going to be just this. I love road trips and I love BC, and so it was meant to be this capture that feeling of the way he would drive around and sketch places, and that instead of seeing maybe the photos, you'd be seeing his drawings and paintings. And that idea does still exist in the film in a certain form. Through researching those shorts, I had bought Robert Amos's book. At that time, it was his first book. He's now got 5. And it was E.J. Hughes Paints Vancouver Island. And one day I was just looking at it and really drawn into the then and now, the archival way of exploring places in BC through these artworks. And also, actually, it was working on stuff that I did a lot of archival work on stuff, a lot of research, and also directed the archival tabletop shoots and everything. And I discovered that I just love working with the archives. I love the research, all of it. And so I was looking through this book and I was just thinking, like, this is so rich. There's so much material here, and it's all been collected and it's all been sort of laid out. This is like basically ready to be made into a film. And if I could just see how it would come together, and it would be so much fun to do all the archival. I was really particularly interested in the places themselves and finding images of those places and what they look like now compared to his artwork. And so each artwork is kind of like a portal into a place or a story. And that was actually my initial, uh, connection to it, was a little bit maybe less about the man himself and more about his body of work and exploring the province through his work.
Mm-hmm. I was struck watching it with how much it allows us to see with new eyes our own place. And I think that's what art should do. But we might take E.J. Hughes for granted. His books are fairly ubiquitous. If you take BC Ferries, they're in the bookshops. And we know his images to one extent or another, I think a lot of us. And fortunately, many of us in British Columbia love to travel, and we take the ferries, we explore a bit. But I don't think I can think of another example of a British Columbian film that reveals to us our own place as well, not just geographically, but historically. Now, conspicuous in its absence is much about the First Nations experience. This is the colonial eye. This is the European eye on our place. But that's what he represents. So if you'd need a film twice as long to tell a fuller story. But it is so engaging and marvelous, I think, for those of us who love this place.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. And the absence of the First Nations story in this story was something that I really wrestled with, and I'm First Nations issues are very important to me. I am always deeply honored to be able to work on any project that includes those stories. And it's funny you say that. So basically, I did have sort of a 3-hour version of this film where we go into communities, and I tried to wrap in more diversity of voice, and it was partially to try and include that. it it always sort of, I had a struggle that wasn't, part of the story, and I tried to find ways to weave it in, but it really was not part of his life. Um, for a bunch of reasons, partially, the age he was and the era this was and everything, and it just wasn't or in his life or in his reality. And so I've tried to touch on things here and there in very subtle ways where I could, and anything more than that felt really forced. Um, but I do have a whole other volume of content that did not make it into the film that has been shot. That was one of the learning experiences for me as a first time feature director, is how much you can pack into, when you're used to making 3 or 5 minute films, an 80 or 90-minute film feels like you're just going to be able to do all of this stuff. And I shot so many different ideas. I really like layers, and I wanted to be able to work a lot of layers in. And my first rough cut was 2.5 hours long, and actually didn't even include any of those community portraits that I'd shot. Um, so that was one of the learning experiences for me, was that the film kind of, I sort of started with putting all this stuff in, and then had to uh, carve away and figure out, what is this film and what does it want to be. And it really was, as soon as I would move away from his story or his experience, it just wouldn't work anymore.
I think it's so often the case that filmmakers go deep into a subject, spend immeasurable amounts of time on it. They often go a little too much and maybe take on too much. And for a viewer, you're more likely to say the film was too ambitious and unfocused than you are saying, oh, they didn't cover enough ground. And in this particular case, I think part of the pleasure is to spend time with E.J. Hughes at different stages of his life. And there's such a lot of material most of us are unaware of. His career as a war artist, for example, that's a very important part of the film. And you probably wouldn't have had time for that if you were just dealing with place and landscape here in BC.
That's a really good point. You have to choose.
Yeah, and I thought it was amazing that you get to visit places that you see his work. I wanted to ask about some of that. Like there's the cafe in Duncan where he used to spend time as a young man, and they have a lot of work on the walls. Is it still there like that? Can you still see so many E.J. Hughes on the walls of that place?
Yes. So this is a restaurant, the Dog House in Duncan, which I believe has been around since the 50s. And he lived in the Cowichan Valley for decades. It was actually as an older man that he would go there. So he ate there every single day, sometimes twice a day. And
yes, he was older.
That's a very unusual thing for someone to do, right? So that was just, I mean, on one hand, E.J. Hughes is known in the art collecting world for certain things, and there's certain eras of his work and certain paintings that are very valuable and very famous. But he did hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of paintings, and there's a lot of aspects of his work that are kind of more appealing to the everyday person, or aspects of his personality. And this was kind of the down home. This was like the homebody version of him. And I didn't realize when I sort of went and knocked on the door at that restaurant and went to check it out, it was really exciting to learn that there actually were some staff who still worked there who knew him, that they had been working there for 30 years or whatever, so they had been his servers. And when you see someone every day, he went there for company and to get to chat with them because they were nice. And
you get the sense that he was a very decent, shy in a way, nice person who found his meaning in life through his wife, and that's a very interesting story, but through his art as well. And I thought that the film is very successful at showing how spiritually enriched our lives can be here because we're so fortunate to live in a place like this. And you don't have to be a pantheist to feel that you're getting spiritual sustenance from taking in this landscape. And he celebrates it in such a way, and to see it on the big screen, it's really very invigorating, I think, for what makes his art special.
Yes. There's a lot of different things there. He does, one of the most famous quotes from E.J. Hughes is that his painting was like a form of worship.
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't talk about being religious. And when you look at his work, I had a friend who once said, he's so very present. And it's like you're experiencing somebody who can sit for an entire day drawing every pebble and every blade of grass, and then come back to that drawing sometimes 10 or 15 or 20 years later and recreate it so faithfully. And you sort of get this real, people talk about forest bathing, right? Like, I think he was just someone who was probably what we would call now maybe like a highly sensitive person.
Mm-hmm.
But there was not language for those things. You could definitely sort of say he probably had some social anxiety. He was famously too shy to go to his own art exhibitions.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the central things we were looking at in the film is how did somebody who's literally too shy to do interviews or go to his own art exhibitions become one of the most well-known painters and highly valued painters in Canada? You look at what's asked of artists today, and you have to promote yourself and be out there doing all these things. And, he was just famously just too shy to do any of that. And so one of the sort of I guess themes of the film is sort of like that book Quiet, The Power of the Introvert, right? Where we live in such an extroverted world, and nowadays everyone's expected to promote themselves so much, and he wouldn't have done well there. But what is the gift that somebody who has such a deep presence or is somehow supported to just quietly do their work the way they want to do it, and what is the gift that has been left because of that? And maybe what do we miss out on by not I guess there's a question for me is like, what do artists need in order to really do their work?
I thought you were able to position his significance as an artist and his individuality as an artist well in context with other artists. Like, it's so fascinating to learn that he had traveled to MoMA and was very impressed with the Rousseau there of the shepherd in the desert with the lion, which is one of the most beautiful paintings you can imagine. But then you start to see his work through that spirit as well, right? And he's not a fast worker. He's not an impressionist. He's so meticulous and painstaking, but at the same time, it doesn't get reduced to sort of this scientific way of looking at things. They're vibrant and they glow. So that was really extraordinary, and I think a gift for the viewer to have this background information. So with the scholarship you engage in, there's some really expert people that we're introduced to. Can you tell us a bit about how cooperative they were from the beginning, and did you have to win them over, and if there was anyone you wish you could include that didn't agree to?
I'm honestly so grateful we're so lucky to have these people in Canada who have had these lifetime careers in arts institutions. So we're talking about Ian Thom, who is a art historian and was at the Vancouver Art Gallery for 30 years as a curator. Charles Hill, who, similarly, I think 40 years at the National Gallery of Canada, also retired. Both of these people have written so many books on Canadian art. Laura Brandon, who was at the Canadian War Museum, who also has written many books. And
she's pretty impressive in her knowledge of that whole body of E.J. Hughes' work that we don't know.
She's so wonderful in the film. And Laura, I mean, you read these, you grow, you're studying arts, you take these books out from the library, you're reading them, and then to get to sort of pick up the phone and call these people and talk to them is one of the real gifts of being a documentary filmmaker. And in a way, I felt like there's sort of this theme in the film of people who are obsessed. Like E.J. Hughes was obsessed with painting, and obsessed with the detail and the places. And I feel like in a way, Robert Amos is certainly has this deep passion. So Robert Amos is an author who is Hughes' official biographer. He has sort of inherited all the materials and is writing a lot of materials about
him. And he's
him.
the author of the books we're most likely to be able to see on shelves now.
Yes, the ones you were talking about that you see on the ferries, and they're also in art gallery shops, and they're wonderful books. And it was one of his books that inspired me to pitch the film. And Robert was the first person that I called. So he was really the door that opened through which all things Hughes flowed, from connections to his estate, to all of the archives, to recommendations about who I should try and talk to, or, just this huge amount of education that came through him, as well as he is a central character in the film as well. So they all have different notes. There was no one who said no, which I'm so grateful for. Some of the actual institutions took a fair amount of footwork. It's not very convenient for, an institution like the National Gallery of Canada, who have a lot going on, to have a film crew come and disrupt what's going on. And everyone's very short-staffed. This was also it was sort of the film has taken over 5 years, and so we were put into development during the pandemic, and so there's a lot of crisis in those arts institutions, and they were understaffed. And so anyway, it was a lot of footwork, but ultimately when you're talking about E.J. Hughes, there's something about him that people just go like, they have a story, or they just say yes. Like, there's something about him that they want to jump in and be a part of it. And so that was one of the gifts of this film.
And the Englishness is a very important part of the film too, I think. I mean, we are a place that is so multicultural, so rich and diverse in the cultures that are represented here. But people that I've known in my own life that reminded me most of E.J. Hughes and his life and war experience and so on. That's a whole strand of an important part of BC's makeup. So I wonder about your own affinity with his work, and you personally, very individually, where you came into an appreciation of E.J. Hughes painting.
Well, there is nothing like standing in front of one of these works. When you look at them in a book, they're really interesting and they're very detailed. He's an incredible draftsman. To look at his drawings, they're just beautiful. Even if people don't know his work, when they look at it, they go, that's beautiful. But I will say it's not that easy to see an E.J. Hughes painting in real life. And when you do get to see one of these paintings, especially one of the famous ones from the 40s or 50s, which are very valuable, it's kind of like meeting a celebrity. Like, you've studied and you've looked at so many different images and you've studied how he made it. And then to see it in person and to see the brushstrokes and the real colors and the depth and the detail and the scale of the actual painting, they sort of radiate this energy, as any really powerful artwork does. It just has like an X factor, that's what makes it a sort of a masterwork, right?
But how long have you been aware of his work? And I guess the other question is, what was the most wow moment for you when you saw a painting in the flesh?
It really, for me, I was sort of background aware of him, but it was pretty much through Robert's books that I got quite aware of, really started to learn about his work. We had no idea this film was going to take 5 years to make. It's not really, you're not really supposed to take 5 years. It's very hard on every part of the process. But one of the gifts of how long it took was that some of these famous paintings came up for auction during the course of making this film. And that was really how we came to film some of his most famous paintings. And so that was one of them. So seeing that painting, I like a Gothic work, and it's definitely his most Gothic painting. I actually do black velvet paintings, but not like of clowns and Elvises, sort of more beautiful things. I just love the rich colors. And so that painting actually kind of looks like a black velvet painting.
A bit different than the mostly sunlit, out of door, deep color work.
Yeah, that is one of his sort of most intense paintings. There was paintings he did right after the war, that were the darkest. They were often going back to his experiences before the war, and we can only speculate. He didn't talk about this, so lots of people have speculated what he might have been working out. It was a very stressful, intense period in his life. He was trying to survive. He was certainly processing a lot of his war experiences. So, you could look at them and say, did he, was it because of this or PTSD or grief with some personal matters? Why are these paintings so intense and so dark compared to what he did later in life? But they are, and they're the ones that are sort of the most in that naive painting style where he was really experimenting with those influences that had come to him through Rousseau and through the Mexican modernists,
Rivera.
Rivera, and yeah. So it's definitely the most stylized take on British Columbia, and I think when people say, nobody else painted the province the way he did, they're especially talking about that kind of brush that sort of those influences that he brought.
For those people watching this without having seen the film yet, I think it's important to say that we're not just looking at painting after painting. We're also seeing photographs. You've also got some amazing material, particularly of Vancouver in its early days. And I'm assuming you worked with the Vancouver Archives for some of that, but where else did you get this great material?
Well, we have, I don't know, probably our material, like our credits, our archival list was at least 30 or 40, institutions and people. And I did most of that archival
That's
footwork.
a lot of work.
I loved it. It's one of my favorite things, honestly. So there were 3 different scavenger hunts or sort of treasure hunts involved with this film. And one of them was the archival one. One of them was finding the actual places. So taking Robert's books and going and trying to figure out where exactly was he standing and what does this place look like now, and going on a road trip. And some of them I could find, some of them I couldn't. Some of them look the same, some of them are completely different. And then the third treasure hunt was, as I was just mentioning, trying to find the actual real paintings or the real artworks and film those, because we can see them in books, but I intentionally made this film in 4K. He's very known for his very detailed paintings, and to be able to train a macro lens and really feel those brush strokes and all those little tiny details that when you're standing in front of it, your eye can, move across the painting and absorb them all. But to be able to put them up on the big screen is a way that we have never experienced his work before. So that was very exciting for me.
Well, it's well worth seeing on a small screen, but the lucky people who manage to see it on a big screen have an added dimension there, which the work, if not requires, then can be enjoyed even more from. So let's talk a bit about the plans for the film and how people will get to see it if they haven't already. So it's screening at the film festival as its world premiere, public screenings. So what else is going to happen before its eventual broadcast on Knowledge Network, and when is that happening?
We don't have an exact broadcast date yet, but I believe it will be in the spring of 2026. We're doing our festival rounds now, so I have my fingers crossed that it will go to, I think it's a film that is largely going to appeal to a Canadian audience, but I'm hoping it'll get out and about to some fun festivals. And I personally would also really like to do some community tours. I'd like to find some old theaters that are still standing, that, these community theaters, and take it there. Or else, for example, E.J. Hughes lived in Shawnigan Lake, and the Shawnigan Lake Museum is in the film. And they've just done a reno, and they have a little pocket theater. And so I definitely plan to bring that film to Shawnigan Lake and to these smaller communities like Duncan, where they knew him, or, the places where they might not get out to a film festival. And because really as I was saying earlier, these paintings can be portals to stories. And in part of the film, in the part where, you're going out and trying to find the real life places, taking the books and going into the community going, do you know where this is? I did this with Revelstoke, just walking around like, where would this view have been taken from? And people would look at it and go, they'd always have a story. They'd either know his work, or if they didn't know his work, it would be like just this opening to have a great conversation with someone in a small community. And I love that. So
Well,
I hope to do that.
Don't undersell the film, though. I think it's true that the most obvious audience is the Canadian audience. But we've shown films which were sort of discoveries of, say, of an Australian artist or a Swiss artist or whatever. And we have so many tourists who are here because of the landscape.
Right.
And I think your film stands with the best art documentaries from any country at any time. So I really think that it should be seen far and wide.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I am so, very few people have seen this film, so I am very excited to hear that you think that. I just want to circle back around because I didn't quite answer your question earlier, but when it comes to archives, there was a lot of energy put into the archives for sure, and it was part of that then and now kind of fascination that I first had. And I always thought that I described the film as an artist biography crossed with a Canadian art history film crossed with a BC travel film. And that his life in particular was a wonderful vehicle to sort of explore some of the things that were happening in art history in Canada.
Yes, and I think that the film is a source of inspiration for our road trips as well.
Yes.
I think we discover some places that we would really like to see.
Yeah.
And whether we take the painting along to match it up exactly, we have a sense of what it looks like there.
Right.
So here are a couple of other questions we're asking of guests at the festival who are doing these interviews with us, unrelated to your film really, but what is your personal best memory at the cinema?
I don't know if this is my best memory, but this is a very, very potent memory, was watching Breaking the Waves in Montreal that would have been 1997. And I got into film by working at the Gulf Islands Film and Television School on Galliano in 1996. And I never actually went to, I didn't do formal film training. And GIFS was a film boot camp for teenagers. And some really amazing filmmakers like Velcro Ripper and Heather Freeze worked there. And it was a DIY sort of ethos. And it was very vibrant. And so, and then after that summer, I made my first film, and afterwards I moved to Montreal, and I didn't really know a lot of people, and I was really doing a lot of I was exploring cinema at the Cinéma du Parc, by myself, and that was my introduction to Dogma 95 filmmaking. It just completely gutted me. I think I sobbed for like 2 hours. But watching Wings of Desire there, watching Eraserhead there, watching Das Boot there, it was an immersion, sort of a self-guided immersion into film. So that time and some of those films are very poignant discovery moments.
We had Breaking the Waves as a gala at the festival here once, and that was one of the most, how would you put it? Amazing screenings, not just the film, but yeah.
Bad for the party.
People's reactions.
Yeah.
So the next question is, what film would you pair with yours for a double bill?
Mm-hmm. I have mixed feelings about this, but my first instinct was really Winds of Heaven, Emily Carr documentary, because they are often side by side in galleries. This is Michael Ostroff's, I think, 2010 film that also took, I think, a very sort of creative, sensual look, different approach. But I think that would probably be an interesting experience to watch those two films side by side, as they're two artists who are best known for depicting the province. There's lots of, there's probably other ones too, but that was the first thing.
It's interesting you mentioned that because it might sound like I wildly praise every local film or film on the arts. That's not exactly true. I love many, but I haven't been as, to use the word love, often with films. And that was another one. And I told Michael that when we had him as a guest. So that would be a great double bill.
I'm glad I thought it would be too. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you speaking with us. And thank you so much for the film. It's a gift and it's going to last.
Thank you, Alan.
Thanks for listening to the VIFF Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave a review. Also, check out viff.org to learn more about what's happening at the VIFF Center year-round.